Hello and welcome to Cargo Shorts, brought to you by Old Dominion Freight Line. I'm your host, Jonathan Betz. Today, we're talking technology and how industry advancements are streamlining supply chain management. Big tech breakthroughs in recent years have changed every part of our lives, and they are reshaping the transportation industry. From APIs to AI to automation, we'll explore some of the biggest tech trends we're seeing in the LTL landscape. Joining me to discuss this is Barry Craver, Vice President of Technology at Old Dominion Freight Line. Barry has been with OD for more than 20 years on both the IT side and the business side. He took on the responsibility of OD Technology in the fall of 2023. And Paul Dugent, Executive Director of the Digital LTL Council under the National Motor Freight Traffic Association. Paul is responsible for bringing together LTL motor carriers, technology providers, and shippers to standardize and digitize the data stream of an LTL shipment. Thank you both for being with us today.
Thanks for having us.
Glad to be with you.
So we kind of ticked off some of those big tech trends we're talking about: APIs, AI, automation. There's a lot of changes. It's a really exciting time. Paul, what do you think are some of the biggest breakthroughs we're seeing in the LTL space?
I would have to say dimensioners. The carriers have invested in dimensioners across the scale, and that is really changing the way carriers do business and is going to result in changes in the classification. Perhaps on the downside for shippers is that now with the carriers being able to check the dimensions on probably, I would say, anywhere up to 80% of their freight, it's creating a lot of description changes for the shippers. Good for the carriers because they recover that revenue, but it makes it difficult for shippers who have to resolve those differences between the new charges and the old charges, and that becomes an administrative cost to them. So I would say that is probably the biggest change that I've seen in the industry.
Barry, what do you think?
So I think dimensioners is one of the big things that we've seen introduced in the LTL space, over the last 10 years. And that technology continues to be refined to hopefully get it to a point where we can do more dimensioning. I think ultimately it helps the shippers as well as the carriers because we can hopefully one day get to density-based pricing. But I think, it's one of the pieces of technology that we've seen proliferate quite a bit in the LTL space over the last 10 years.
Is there anything else that you think stands out, Barry?
I think just the digitization of everything in the LTL space stands out, from the API usage to the number of shippers that are using some type of TMS or some type of integration with the carriers. I think we've seen that grow quite a bit over the last 10 years and hope to continue to see it grow, because I think at the end of the day, if we can get the information from the shipper electronically, it will save the shipper and the carriers in the long term with handling that paper and having to key the data off of that piece of paper every time we make a pickup.
Barry, I want to talk about artificial intelligence, as it seems like it is reshaping every industry. Do you think that also applies to LTL?
So, I think artificial intelligence holds a lot of promise. There's some real opportunities in the LTL space with what can be done with artificial intelligence. I think, for most carriers, taking a cautionary approach to artificial intelligence and how much information is, gathered outside of the carrier's four walls for the artificial intelligence versus just using what's within the carrier's four walls with the artificial intelligence is the first step for all carriers to move forward with AI. But I think it holds a lot of promise with, showing you anomalies in data, as well as being able to identify, opportunities to optimize that maybe you didn't see before.
So Barry, with that in mind, what do you think is really exciting that OD is working on right now? I know there's a lot of different projects underway. You guys are really forward looking. What do you think is the most exciting technology for you guys right now?
So, I think the most exciting technology that I see right now is looking at the various automation opportunities that we have, from the pickup to the cross-docking of shipments and the movement of that freight between our network. So when I think about that, I think about what we're doing with our pickup and delivery driver phones and the software that we run on those, and what we can do with the information we gather from that, to how we can optimize the dock to cross-dock the freight more efficiently to get it loaded out, to actually looking at our network and how freight or how pickups move through our network and how we can move them more efficiently through our network, as well as how we can more efficiently schedule the drivers that are actually going to move that freight in our network.
And Paul, I want your thoughts on this because there is overall this big push, it seems, to standardize APIs in particular. Why is that such a priority for the industry?
Well, it has numerous benefits for both the shippers, 3PLs, and the carriers, not just to standardize it, but to digitize it. The Digital LTL Council has created a API roadmap that includes 7 operational APIs and 2 administrative APIs, that once we get this implemented, it's going to transform the interaction between carriers, shippers, and 3PLs. And we're well into that at this point in time.
And go further with that. Why will that transform the relationship between all these different parties?
Well, let's look at the 7 operational APIs. The first one is a rate quote. We haven't delved into that one yet. The next one is the eBOL alerting, which, as you know, has been out for about a year or so now, perhaps 2 years. And I can tell you that version 2.1 of the eBOL alerting is being released today and will be available for download. Then we have pickup request and visibility. We have in-transit visibility, preliminary freight charges, over and under charge claims, and loss and damage claims. Those are the operational APIs that will be developed. And then we have 2 administrative APIs. One is document retrieval, and the other one is a routing guide. So when you think about that, it addresses practically every interaction that the carrier and the shipper or 3PL has, and standardizes it and digitizes it.
And Barry, what do you think about this? Has this switch also come with some complications? Is this challenging for some customers to adopt? How do you guys try to help customers work through these huge movements?
Well, we're big proponents of what is being done with the LTL Digital Council and the APIs that they are working to standardize across all carriers. I think the challenge we've got with our shipper community is them being able to get the resources to interface to those APIs. But I think by standardizing across all LTL carriers, then you can, in essence, help the shippers by knowing they can actually develop the API integration one time and use it for all the different carriers that they use. Same thing goes for any third-party TMS solutions, visibility solutions that need to get access to that same API integration. If it's standardized amongst all the carriers, then we should be able to get adoption. So I think the hardest part for the shippers right now is going to be getting the resources to change, to start using those standardized APIs. But I think once they start doing that, they'll start seeing the benefits of, now that I've done it with one carrier, or my TMS provider has done it with one carrier, or my visibility partner has done it with one carrier, then they can do it with all the carriers that they may potentially use, either directly or through one of those third-party services.
So it's really a ripple effect, and some of the biggest challenges is just convincing them to take the plunge.
Yes, that is I think some of the biggest challenges is just getting them on board and getting them to allocate resources to doing this. Because I think, you look at it, if I've already got an API integration with a carrier that I use, why do I want to go to a standard API interface or standard API with all the carriers? Well, that's just going to benefit you in the future if you decided to go with a TMS solution, a third-party visibility solution, if you've got that standard API integration already built. So I think while the long-term effects are the most beneficial, it's getting them past that first short-term benefit of investing in the resources to get it done.
Paul, you talked about or hit on the eBOLs, and I want to talk more about that because I know last summer the NMFTA rolled out a new single standard eBOL. So can you talk a little bit about how well that's been received by the industry?
Yeah, sure. Right now, we have probably of the number of carriers that have already adopted it represents about 66% of the revenue in the industry. Now, that number is kind of old because now with the demise of Yellow, we don't know how that freight has been distributed amongst the carriers. So it's probably actually higher than that. With those that have pledged and not yet applied it, uh, that's um, that's another about 4% of the industry. So 70% of the industry, represented by revenue, has either implemented it or has pledged to do so. So we think that from the carrier's perspective, we've gotten very good buy-in. Now, from the 3PL perspective, it's a little bit different. Right now, we only know of two large 3PLs who have adopted it, C.H. Robinson and Worldwide. And C.H. Robinson came out of this, and they jumped on this immediately. And they immediately worked with about five or so carriers to implement it. Now they've implemented it with about 15 carriers. So they've been a huge supporter of this, and they continue to lead the 3PL industry in adopting the eBOL.
And why do you think there has been this disconnect in adoption between carriers and 3PLs?
And it goes back to what Barry was saying, that it comes down to resources, getting the IT resources to be able to do that. That seems to be the biggest hurdle that has to be overcome.
So, when we talk about this big push, really, across the industry towards automation, towards digitization, towards the future, I mean, Barry, how difficult of a push has that been? Whether we're talking about, EBOLs or electronic payments, how hard has that push been?
I think it's been challenging without a doubt, especially if your shipper community or TMS community is already giving you information electronically, whether it's via EDI or whether it's old APIs that you may have developed that didn't meet the standard. So I think it's challenging in those senses, but I also think they recognize in the cases where they've already done the transformation, and I'll use CH Robinson as one of them since they were, big with EDI. If they invest in the transformation to the API and the Digital LTL Council standard, I think they realize the benefits, like I said earlier, of, hey, I've done it with one. If they are all using the same standard, I can easily do it with all the rest of them.
And what do you think is the central benefit to shippers?
To me, the central benefit to shippers is the accuracy of the data that ultimately comes back into the shipper system. So the shippers want to obviously get automation on their end as well, from invoicing and payables standpoint, track and trace standpoint, and they use their own reference numbers for cross-referencing what they ship with the carriers. Well, if the carriers are having to enter those reference numbers manually, then getting that information back and matching it up can be a challenge if something gets transposed in the process of entering that data, or it doesn't get entered at all. And so I think the benefit to the shipper community is the accuracy of the data they get back from the carriers when we transmit them the data on their invoices, on their track and trace, on any of their visibility information that they're looking for.
So, with that in mind, this idea of better transparency, better data, more accurate data, Paul, do you foresee this ushering in changes to the classification system?
Well, the classification system is being changed as we speak. Back last year, the classification group came out with the classification reimagined, and the phase one to that was to cancel overly specific items, which tend to be difficult to interpret, apply, or verify, and minimize the number of geographical groups and number of items in generic groups. And where there was no significant handling, stowability, or liability characteristics, they would assign an 11 sub-provision density scale. So that started out, like I said, probably over a year ago. And then the classification had a panel, and the panel was consisted of shippers, 3PLs, and carriers to determine the direction of the classification. And what they found out in that panel was that in the case of the ease of using the classification, the carriers, as you might expect, 77% of that felt that they could understand it pretty well, but shippers, only 26%. 3PLs, who are the transportation professionals, only 53% of those really felt that the classification was easy to understand, and TMS providers were about 35%. And would they prefer fewer or more generic commodity descriptions? 90% said yes, they would prefer fewer or more generic descriptions. And then if density was the primary characteristic, is there fewer commodity descriptions? Would you prefer a single class, a limited number of density-based classes, or the current 11 sub-provision? 70% said they would prefer the current 11 sub-provision density scale.
So there is this demand for change.
Oh, yeah, there's a huge demand for change from what we're seeing. And so the classification is in the process of making those changes. They've already reduced the number of items. In 2023, 1,193 articles were canceled, and they're going to continue to do that in favor of a 11 or 18 scale density scale. Question is, I think, and the carriers, as we are well prepared for that because of the dimensioners, but the shippers, in order to provide the density get the DIMS off of the dock and get it onto the bill of lading, they're going to have some method efficiently capturing that information off the dock. And we're talking about on every pallet. And so the classification can do this fairly quickly because they meet 3 times a year to do this. But how fast can the shippers respond by being able to capture that information and get it onto the bill of lading to avoid all those description changes that would come through the dimensioners? So that's the issue that I think is going to be paramount in the issue and the industry for at least a year or so.
And is the technology there to try to ease some of that issue?
Well, the technology is there. The question is can a shipper justify a dimensioner? Larger shippers, probably. Smaller ones, perhaps not. And what kind of technology are they going to use? I mean, maybe there's some cheaper, I guess for a real small shipper, you can use a tape measure. But for a large shipper, you're going to need some efficient way to do that.
So, Paul, when we talk about change and the future and technology, what are you most excited about looking forward?
Well, I think in terms of technology, I am most excited about the API roadmap. Right now, we have, as you know, we just released a new version of the eBOL lading. Of those API functions that I defined on the roadmap, we have the pickup, request, and visibility API that is currently, the requirements have been completed and the field descriptions have been completed, and we are now reviewing that. We're going to take that before a tech committee to make sure that it is suitable for programming. So that's well along its way. The in-transit visibility workshop we're also well along the way there. We've got the requirements completed and the field descriptions being developed, and the preliminary freight charges workshop. That is in the same position. So we've got two other workshops, or three workshops that are well underway to being probably, I would say the pickup visibility and request is probably going to be available sometime, I would say, in the next quarter.
A lot of exciting things coming online there. So, Barry, as you look ahead and look to the future, what do you think the LTL industry is going to look like in, let's say, 10 years?
So, I think the API standardization of the data between the shipper and the carriers is going to be at a very high percentage compared to where we are today. And so, what excites me about that is the accuracy of the data that we're going to be receiving and being able to do analysis on, analytics on, potentially using AI technology on to help us more efficiently run our operation and pass that on to the shippers, I think is the exciting thing that I see with the LTO industry.
Yeah, it's all about getting better, more accurate data. All right, Barry, Paul, great to have you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Well, automation, digitization are quickly reshaping the LTL industry, allowing for more transparency and visibility. Seamless technology can lead to better planning, better prices, and better service. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to check out our full Cargo Shorts podcast series. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, SoundCloud, and YouTube Music. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review, share with your colleagues, or drop us an email at marketing@odfl.com. You can also visit the OD Outlook section of the Old Dominion Freight Line website at odfl.com, where you can find additional information on this topic. Thanks for listening.